Hello, and I hope you're all very well. This week's parsha, Kiseitse, starts in the middle of the regulations about making war, which began last week. It's actually the parsha that contains more mitzvahs than any other parsha in the entire Torah. And as I said, it begins with the phrase Kiseitse, when you go out. Unfortunately, this will not be applying to me and Vicky this week. We've been so much looking forward to returning to shul after a lovely holiday. But even though we came home early, unfortunately we got caught by the quarantine. And it's a few more days before we're going to be able to rejoin the community, which is why I've recorded this drosha in advance of this Shabbos, because I'd actually planned to give it in person. I've mentioned before that juxtaposition, particularly in Dvarim, is a major subject in rabbinic literature. There is a discussion as to whether juxtaposition is a valid way of understanding and deriving laws and ideas throughout the Torah. But in Dvarim, everyone agrees it's a speech. The speech has a certain flow, and when Moshe moves from one subject to another, there is a conceptual link between them. But one of the most difficult to explain is Kiseitse, because there are over 70 mitzvahs. Rashi does a valiant job based on early midrashim, but nonetheless, the movement from one section to another is often quite difficult to understand. Of these difficult ones, perhaps the most difficult is to understand the very last two sections of the parsha. The final section is Zohar. This is the requirement to remember the evils of Amalek and to blot them out. This is a Purim theme, not one I intend to delve into in great detail now. And it's a very difficult one. There does appear to be a requirement to erase the existence and memory of a particular people. This is unpalatable, it's painful, and it seems to be out of kilter with modern sensitivities. And much ink has been spilt discussing, not just in the modern era, but even in earlier times, whether it applies today, if so, and to whom. Perhaps it's only relevant to the Messianic era. Perhaps it's only a concept and not an action. But irrespective of that, which has to be left for another time, there is without question a thematic requirement to erase a certain way of thinking that undermines the very essence of Judaism. But what is this juxtaposed to? The previous section is about weights and measures, that you're not allowed to have in your home corrupt measures that are filled with salt rather than metal, so they appear, when you put them on a scale, to be heavier than they actually are. Measures that are inconsistent. Effectively, it's the earliest weights and measures regulation to ensure that people who are selling things from their home or from their business are selling fairly and accurately. Why would these two things be juxtaposed? So Rashi makes a good attempt, and he says, if you cheat in business, that's when you should be afraid of your enemies. Cheating in business, weights and measures juxtaposed to Amalek. It's interesting. The Sforno, writing several hundred years later in Renaissance Italy, offers a bigger approach. He says Kiseitse, and really the entire project of mitzvahs, are intended to find a way to allow the divine to rest with human beings, whether it's in the camp in the desert, whether it's the people in the land of Israel, whether it's the individual wherever we live. It's about spirituality and holiness. We've already discussed corrupt courts, corrupt dayanim, bribery, and how these are things that drive away the divine presence. And now we move on to understanding this is not just a public concern, it's a private concern as well. Individuals must be honest. And if they're not, then they slip into an ideology, a worldview, a certain self-centered agenda that is the very antithesis of the Torah. And with this, I think the Sforno is explaining why it is that weights and measures are juxtaposed to Amalek. There are certain activities, there are certain experiences that undermine what it means to be Jewish. Yes, there's Amalek, our historic enemy. Go back to the story in Egypt as we left Egypt, that they attacked those who were the stragglers, a certain horrible mindset, an attitude, a godlessness that their mentality espouses. But there's another sort, perhaps closer to home, of godlessness. And that is when we think that we can cheat other people and we think we can cheat God. honesty, trustfulness, reliability, dependability. These are absolutely central to Jewish life and Jewish thought, just as central as the need to repel our enemies whose godlessness seems to be more overt. And this, says the Sforno, is why it is that in a parasha dealing with spirituality and the aspirations of the Jewish world, we must learn not just about our external enemies, but our internal demons, and ensure that to create a functional society, we put honesty, accuracy, dependability and trustfulness at the very heart of our religious life. Sei gesund und stark and good Shabbos, and so much looking forward to seeing you all next week.